All right. So this morning I woke up and there's all over the news is about short-term rentals, how it's going to create more fears about a market crash, and how Airbnb is down over 50% year over year. So I've got a lot of phone calls from friends and investors about this topic. And so when you read headlines like Airbnb, this is on Newsweek, Airbnb revenue collapses, sparking housing market crash fears. I just thought I would share some information of what's really happening, uh, in Louisiana and also across the country. So, you see articles like this, and it's partly true. Revenues for Airbnbs are down nationwide. I am going to break down the Lafayette, Louisiana area just as one example, but you can see here inside of these articles you'll see um, this chart where it says the top 10 cities where revenues are collapsing, and New Orleans actually made this list as number 11. It's down 37%. Well, if you're in the short-term rental industry or as an investor, then most of these big cities are imposing more and more regulations on on the short-term rental investors, limiting how many units can actually be used as short-term. We do have there. We do not see that in Lafayette currently. There are a few. There is a movement to start to regulate it in some manner, but it has not affected our area, and so I certainly don't see this affecting the values of the properties because we still do not have as much supply as we have demand across the country. So, if anything, this may increase some of the supply in some of these bigger cities, but I don't see that happening here. And this is why I'm going to show you an overview of what's happening in Acadiana. And I just want to give you an idea of how many rentals we have. We're in a good location as far as, rental demand. We've got decent rental demand. We've got very low rental growth as compared to the rest of the country, meaning we're not increasing our supply as much as some of the other parts of the country. However, and I'll get to this in a second, we did see an increase, significant increase since 2022 to 2023. Seasonality is great. We have a great score on seasonality because it's always usually typically good weather here as compared to the rest of the country. But just to show you, we have 423 active rentals right here in Lafayette Parish. Now, an active rental would be a rental that has advertised to being available at least one day in the last month. Now, a lot of these houses people live in, and so they don't have them available every single month. Just keep that in mind. So that's what we're calling active rentals. You can see an entire majority of the active rentals are entire homes, but there are some rentals that are private rooms inside of houses that are on either Airbnb or VRBO. Now, this is the breakdown for that. We have, out of all of the 423 active rentals, there's 71% of them are actually on Airbnb, with only 9% of them on VRBO, and only 20% of the 423 are actually listed on both Airbnb and VRBO. Majority of them are 1 to 3 bedroom properties. Here is our rental growth, and this is what I wanted to show you. So since Q1 of 2020, we really haven't increased significantly. We were at around 323, and up until 2022, Q1, we were at 331. So this was relatively flat as far as rental growth. Now, in the last year, we saw a significant increase. We went from 331 to an average of 436 rentals, which is a 31% increase in number of available short-term rental properties. Um, you know, I I did wanted to show you guys the rates, the average daily rates, the increase in this. So you can see we've had a very flat average daily rent rate, from July 2018 from 94. This is an average daily rate, $94 per night. And if you go all the way to 2022, um, we saw a in July a average of 145. So we have seen a significant increase from the beginning. Remember, it's become more popular for renting houses or personal properties than staying in hotels during COVID. And you can see these, especially in our area. I can't speak for every area, but our area everywhere. So you can see April and May, and then you have the fall, like November, October, and then you have April and May. April and May are going to be the highlights, our season for short-term rentals, and then again in the fall. And what's driving that here is really the weather. The summertime is our low parts. You can see July 2022, and that trend does go through. This was the only part that in April 2020, that's when we were going through the COVID lockdown. So we had very little activity. That's the one anomaly for the springtime. And then, it shot back up in the fall. And it continued to go up and down with the spring and the summer and fall. So we really haven't seen a decrease locally in short-term rental, or the number of short-term rentals, or the average daily rate. We've actually seen an increase. Now we are heading into the summer, so we have a typical seasonality to the short-term rental market, but overall it's very healthy. uh, with occupancies have seen more of an adjustment than daily rates. Now this is a combination of more supply, so the renters have more, um, they have more options. And you can see right here what happened in the summer of 2020. We had a huge spike in occupancy, and this peak was in September 2020. Well, that was because we came out of the lockdown and everybody wanted to catch up on their vacations and weddings and other things that they were working on. You can see that our average daily rate in April of 2023, a couple months ago, was 62%. And going back to April 19, we were at 52%. So we really haven't seen a huge change pre-COVID to after COVID years, where we did have much higher occupancies right after and during the COVID lockdown times. Um, Now, this is an interesting chart right here. This is booking demand. This is actually our the actual number of rental units that have number of nights, listing booked nights that rent. And you can see we had a peak out of all the listings, because we have more listings this year than we did ever before. We had in April over 4,162 nights that were booked, and that's a significant increase. The occupancy is a little bit lower because there's just overall more listings available, and you can see this trend is going up. So we do have we are booking overall more nights in short-term rentals or through Airbnb and VRBO this year than we've ever seen. Even in May, when the normal seasonality is to decrease towards the summer, it still was the highest May that we've ever seen as far as number of bookings, and that goes back into our revenue. And you can see this right here. This is our revenue. Let me see here. In 2023, we saw it peak out at over $700,000 in monthly revenue for short-term rentals. And if you compare that to April 2022, you can see we were close under 600,000, and then all the way back to let's see here. Can't go to April 2019, but we can see April of 2019. You can see we're well below 400,000 in revenue that month. So overall, I just want to put some context to some of the news that is out there. We absolutely are not seeing that here in Lafayette. We don't have any major regulations. Even some of the ones that are being proposed don't seem to be catastrophic like they have been in New Orleans. And New Orleans has been in legal battles with all of their regulations since they started implementing them, because they are unconstitutional. So they're constantly defending it and spending tens of thousands of dollars, over there. And there are reasons for that. Another big myth, if you look at, we hear this a lot. I've heard this from people in Lafayette, that they think it could, having short-term rentals, decrease values in the neighborhood. And there's actually no statistics that are supporting that. In actuality, it's the opposite. Short-term rentals in certain areas are increasing the values, and that's one of the reasons they're putting more regulations on short-term rentals in bigger cities like New Orleans, Chicago, San Francisco, all these other areas, is because it's becoming too expensive to live in those areas, because it's properties worth so much more just to rent it out on a short-term rental. So people who live and work in those areas are being pushed out. So it's gentrification almost, where they're going into older neighborhoods, downtown areas, and revitalizing it, and the property values are increasing. So anyway, I thought I would just share this information with you guys, because it's kind of funny. Headlines are is what makes sales. So it's not surprising when the news media comes out with articles and says the world is ending, short-term rentals are going away, and the market is probably going to crash. So just thought I would share that information, how it pertains to Louisiana, and even more specific to Lafayette. If you like that information, or if you want to comment or give me any questions that you may have, I'd be glad to answer it. And if you're interested in short-term rentals as a strategy, an investment strategy, there's opportunities all across the Gulf states, from Texas all the way to Florida. And I'd be glad to provide you with any recommendations or any advice that you may want. So please reach out to me. I'd love to hear from your comments, and I'd like to hear if you have any short-term rentals. What are you experiencing currently as far as your occupancy? Do you think my numbers are right, or do I have it way off? Anyway, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.